Coming up on Network Africa. South Africa's poll agency rejects the bid to remove former President Jacob Zuma from the MK party. Rescuers continue to search for over 40 people missing after the building collapsed in the city of George, South Africa. Plus, Kenya floods raise cholera risk as the World Health Organization records 44 cases. Hello and welcome to the program today. I'm Layo Olarinde here in Lagos. We begin in South Africa, where the Electoral Commission is rejecting a request to remove former President Jacob Zuma as the leader of the newly formed Umkhonto weSizwe MK party. It was responding to a letter by the MK founder Jabulani Khumalo, who wanted the commission to remove Mr. Zuma as the face of the party and from its list of potential members of parliament. Mr. Khumalo, who was recently expelled from the party, says Mr. Zuma fraudulently occupies the position as leader. He also wrote to Mr. Zuma, placing him on precautionary suspension for what he says is several acts of misconduct. However, in a statement on Tuesday, the Independent Electoral Commission, IEC, says it does not interfere with political parties' internal affairs and confirms that Mr. Zuma remains a registered leader of the MK party. Mr. Zuma, the 82-year-old, has thwarted attempts to stop him or his new party from contesting in the general election scheduled for May the 29th. On Friday, the Constitutional Court is expected to hear an appeal by the IEC on Mr. Zuma's candidacy ban for a parliamentarian seat. In March, the Electoral Commission unsuccessfully tried to bar him over a contempt of court conviction. Well, it's exactly 3 weeks to the South African election, and the Independent Electoral Commission, IEC, has announced that over 27 million South Africans are set to participate in the upcoming 2024 national and provincial elections. Now, this figure marks the highest voter turnout since the inception of democracy in the country. The elections are scheduled to take place on May the 29th this year. However, some small businesses are concerned that the imminent risk of economic turbulence and protest action during the election season could impact their operations. Our correspondent, Innocent Samosa, has more.
The recent Small and Medium Enterprises Confidence Index indicates that the 2024 elections are one of the most monumental and contested in South African history. Entrepreneur Sylvester Chibzo is hoping for a peaceful election. However, he warned that protest action during the election season could impact his operations.
No, the only thing in life, we are praying for peaceful election. And we believe South Africa is a peaceful election always. I've been here in 21 years, if I'm not mistaken. Since I've been here, there's no election that will be violent. But I believe this one, everything will be peaceful.
Sylvester says, given the opportunity, he would vote for the economic freedom fighters for these reasons.
No, if I do have the opportunity, I can vote for him because I see that he's a man who loves the African brothers and sisters.
Is it necessary for SMEs to prepare themselves?
We've run successfully many elections, both local, provincial and national, without any hindrances. Is it necessary to prepare for any unforeseen events? Absolutely, for anybody, any business, any individual and any organization. But that doesn't mean that South Africa is under siege or is about to experience an explosion.
Ahead of any election, there is naturally a degree of uncertainty. In South Africa, the uncertainty is higher than usual, given that for the first time in democratic South Africa, there is the possibility that the ANC may lose its outright majority. For most investors and businesses, this uncertainty mainly relates to policy continuity. In other words, should the ANC lose its outright majority, could that mean a change in the general policy direction and approach?
The South African Special Risk Insurance Association, SASRIA CEO Mpumi Chikwe, recently warned that the uncertainty surrounding South Africa's upcoming elections could risk a repeat of the 2021 July unrest. And she's warning that businesses should prepare accordingly. Now, the July riots led to an estimated loss of 50 billion rands, 31.5 billion rands of which SASRIA covered. From Johannesburg, South Africa, Innocent Samosa, Channels Television News.
Staying with South Africa, more than a day after an apartment building collapsed in Western Cape Province, rescuers are still searching for over 40 people that are unaccounted for in the southern coastal city of George. At least 34 people have so far been removed from the rubble, 7 of whom have been confirmed dead. Survivors and loved ones of other people still trapped remain at the scene. The cause of the collapse, which happened while the building was under construction, is being investigated. Now, the rescue effort includes 200 people with sniffer dogs, heavy lifting equipment, and a search removing concrete blocks and debris by hand. Meanwhile, in East Africa, a 5-story building collapsed in Kenya's capital, Nairobi, on Tuesday night, leading to a major rescue operation led by the Kenya Red Cross. The building collapsed in Ituri, on the outskirts of the city, with initial reports suggesting dozens of people were trapped beneath the rubble. But on Wednesday morning, the Kenyan Red Cross said all tenants of the building had been accounted for. The East African nation has been experiencing unprecedented heavy rains since March that have claimed the lives of 238 people and displaced 235,000 others. And at least 44 cholera cases have been reported in Kenya's Tana River County, even as flooding raises the risk of spread of waterborne diseases. A statement by the World Health Organization, WHO, says Kenyan officials, supported by the organization and other agencies, have been monitoring the health situation and response around the country in the wake of the floods. Now, the flooding has affected more than 250,000 people, with 238 deaths reported across the country. Tana River is one of the most affected counties by the flooding. On Tuesday, Kenya's Health Principal Secretary, Mary Mutoni, said there is a grave danger of waterborne diseases becoming a disaster if it's not addressed in time. In the meantime, the president has declared this Friday a national holiday to remember those who died from the ongoing floods in the country, as well as for Kenyans to plant trees. Well, President William Ruto said that the day will allow Kenyans to plant trees to mitigate against the effects of climate change, which has been responsible for the severe floods. Well, let's get more updates from Kenya. Joining us now is the VOA's Nairobi Bureau Chief, Mariama Diallo. Hello, Mariama. Thank you for your time.
Leo, thank you so much for having me today.
Now, the government is warning about the risk of waterborne diseases, and we're hearing that, from the WHO saying that 44 cholera cases have been reported so far. What measures are in place to, bring this under control?
I think President Ruto, given everything that's been happening the past few weeks, knowing with all the consequences that could come out of the flooding, he had instructed its Ministry of Health, obviously, to work with their international partners, including the WHO, World Health Organization, also basically UNHCR, other agencies such as the Africa Research Foundation, to make sure that everything that's related to flooding consequences that come with flooding are addressed and worked on. I think he called on relevant also agencies to work with the National Disaster Operations Center, the NDOC. Since then, I think in order to manage basically this crisis, the Ministry of Health has been leading the relief efforts and then making sure that prioritizing the distributions of essential supplies. And some of those supplies include water treatment chemicals. They talk about an infection prevention items as well. Let me just remind you and other people, obviously our audience, that in 2023, Kenya actually had about 9,000 cholera cases. I think at the time in February of 2023, they had embarked into a vaccination campaign with WHO, and were able to vaccinate about 2.2 million people above the age of 1. And during that time, I think the reports from WHO from those 9,000 cases were about 145 deaths. So I think the country is used to, they know the drill, they know how to deal with some of these cholera outbreaks. So hopefully the things that are coming up, they are able to tackle it right away.
Indeed, Mariama, and as the government, is dealing with this health risk, we also know President Ruto pledged, cash aid to victims of the flooding. How is this supposed to pan out?
Well, President Ruto hasn't talked about yet how that cash is going to get into the hands of some of these flood victims. He talked about it on Monday as he was visiting an area that's called Mathare. He talked about trying to give 10,000 Kenya shillings to people that are affected, to flood victims that have been displaced. And this is a way, about 10,000 Kenya shillings is basically the equivalent of about $75. That's something that he talked about being able to give to some of these flood victims for 3 months to help them with relocation. We know that the reason is because some of the people, some of the victims, some of these flood victims have been living, as they talked about, and as your images are showing, too close to some of the river banks, and some of those people can't go back because there is actually demolition that is starting to happen with some of those houses that have been built too close to the rivers. So some of these people who live there, they are affected not just in the short term, but in the long term, because they have nowhere else to go back to.
And has there been any respite, or are the rains still falling even as we speak?
Very good question. I actually interviewed the director, David Gikungu, the director of the Weather Service. Basically, I'm trying not to say the word that I always have trouble saying, the Meteorological Services. Oh my God, I think I got it this time. He talked about the fact this new forecast, at least the forecast comes every week on Mondays after 3 p.m. So for this week, he had indicated that there would be some rains in some parts of the country. Obviously, most of the country will be wet, but he also talked about the intensity of the rains, that will be diminished a little bit. It won't be as intense in the second week, the second part of this forecast, which is probably the reason why President Ruto, who had suspended schools the past 2 weeks, has actually announced just a few hours ago that school will be reopened on Monday, given probably, I think the director was supposed to actually meet with the deputy president on right after our interview to brief them about what the weather will be like during this forecast.
Oh, well, I believe that's, good news, because I was going to ask if there's any hope for, the schools resuming. But thankfully, the children will be going back to school on Monday. It remains to be seen, and we hope for, safe circumstances even as they do so. Thank you so much, Mariama Diallo, the VOA's Nairobi Bureau Chief.
Thank you very much for having me.
Welcome back to the program. Germany's efforts at energy transition for the future has helped cut its dependence on fossil fuels by 65%, and Nigeria can do the same with a plan and political will to execute it. Now, this was the message propagated by the German State Secretary and Special Envoy for International Climate Action, Jennifer Morgan, during a public lecture at the University of Lagos, Akoka. Ms. Morgan said Germany is looking to guide Nigeria into making similar changes for both human and economic prosperity. Our correspondent, Amarachi Ubani, reports.
She may have started out as an American environmental activist, but Ms. Jennifer Morgan has naturalized in Germany, studying and providing solutions that have helped the country make the necessary energy transition from dependence on fossil fuels to renewables. It's a knowledge she's brought to the University of Lagos, one of the leading academic institutions actively seeking and implementing energy solutions to everyday needs.
We recently passed the most ambitious legislative package of climate and energy legislation in our history. We have a target backed up by a series of laws to achieve 80% renewables in the electricity sector by 2030. And we want and have a national law to be climate neutral by 2045. And according to our independent environment agency, we are on track, but we are not relaxing because we have much more to be done. But right now in 2023, we have 56% of our electricity that came from renewable energy sources. And that's in a country where our solar radiation is the same as Alaska. Imagine what we could do with your solar radiation here in your country. So we have a fully reliable electricity supply for everyday life and for business. And we're phasing out coal, which is our major fossil fuel, ideally by 2030.
She emphasized the danger in postponing mitigations against climate change, saying the weather crisis will happen more often in the coming years. Nigeria, however, has to find her own solutions in her other natural resources such as wind and solar.
Last year, the International Renewable Energy Agency produced a report on Nigeria, and it showed that actually renewable energy technologies will be key to achieving a sustainable energy mix and meeting the country's growing needs. And it also found that investing in renewables is equally, if not a bit more cost effective than continuing to invest the conventional fossil fuel path. And it also found that a scenario with rapid renewable energy expansion, Nigeria could provide, again, the electricity to its entire population 5 years sooner than under current plans. So Nigeria indeed has an ambitious energy transition plan. Your government is on it. Your country is well positioned to both meet national energy access goals and also remain a central player internationally over the years through renewable energies and hydrogen, and particularly from renewable sources. And Nigeria, as I mentioned, is also rich in lithium, which is in high demand if you're looking at a renewables-based economy.
A question and answer session follows her lecture as students and environmental experts highlight challenges of energy transition. Ms. Morgan again turns them to political will to achieve solutions. The conversation is expected to continue in other fora, as the German government says it's looking to work with associations and groups invested in curbing the climate crisis. Amarachi Ubani, Channel Television News.
A levy of 0.5% on all electronic transactions valued by the businesses specified in the second schedule of the Cybercrimes Prohibition and Prevention Act 2015 will now be remitted to the National Cybersecurity Fund administered by the National Security Advisor. Now, this is contained in a circular from the Central Bank of Nigeria to all commercial, merchant, non-interest and payment service banks. This directive, which is set to begin in 2 weeks from May the 6th, has been generating reactions. Our business correspondent, Ini John Mekwa, highlights some implications and concerns in this report.
The Enhancing Financial Innovation and Access report shows that while 71% of urban adults have bank accounts in Nigeria, only 40% of those in rural areas have accounts. This has been largely attributed to insufficient infrastructure to support financial transactions. But there are a handful of Nigerians who were reluctant to embrace the electronic world because of charges. Currently, up to about 10 charges are attached to various electronic transactions, compounded by the now introduced cybersecurity levy. While the legality of the cybersecurity levy is founded on the Cyber Crimes Prohibition Prevention Act, amended 2024, the interpretation seems to leave some gaps.
What does the law say? Section 44, subsection 2 talks about 0.5% of all transactions, electronic transfers. But the Act says these transactions should be deducted by businesses. And then it goes further in the schedule to list 5 types of businesses that fall within the ambit of this regulation. Talks about GSM, internet service providers, banks and financial institutions, insurance companies, and the stock exchange. So these 5 entities are the businesses that are bound by that section 44 sub 2. And then you now have the guidelines from CBN. First of all, there are other legal issues that come within the foray of this conversation. Does CBN have the powers, to issue these guidelines pursuant to this law? Does the Act empower them?
Adding this new tax to the already existing 40% tax on business profit and the possible discouragement to the adoption of cashless policy are also to be considered.
I imagine the implication of this now, first for the cost of doing business. I imagine the implication for what the government itself is even trying to do to harmonize taxes. As at 2023, e-payments data was 600 trillion. So if you are taking 0.5% of that, you are talking about close to maybe 3 trillion.
Harmonization of taxes has been the focus of the Taiwo Oyedele-led Presidential Fiscal Policy and Tax Reforms Committee, which seems not to have been involved in this new levy, as a statement from Mr. Oyedele notes. The new cybersecurity levy has come to the notice of the Presidential Fiscal Policy and Tax Reforms Committee. We are currently reviewing the new tax and engaging internally with relevant stakeholders to understand the rationale for it and decide on the next steps. While the CBN has highlighted some exemptions to the application of the levy to include loan disbursements and payment, salary payment, intra-account transfers, transactions on long-term investment, non-profit and charitable transactions, banks recapitalization-related funding, and 10 others, there are questions as to how such transactions can be properly differentiated for implementation, as well as how to avoid abuse. John Mekwa, Channels Television News.
Now, Russia plans to open an embassy in Sierra Leone by the end of 2024. Now, this was made known by the Russian Foreign Minister, Sergei Lavrov, after meeting his counterpart from the West African nation, Timothy Kaba. During a press conference in Moscow, Mr. Lavrov emphasized that the decision has already been made to establish a new Russian mission in Freetown and that both parties are working on the details. He further announced that the nation's respective governments are also considering a collaboration on nuclear energy, including the potential construction of a facility in Sierra Leone. On his part, Mr. Kaba says Sierra Leone looks forward to working together for international peace and security. Russia and Sierra Leone established their diplomatic relations back in 1962.
Heighten our economic possibilities. Today, I'm here. We also spoke about our multilateral cooperation. I want to thank the Russian Federation for voting for Sierra Leone as it aspired to become a non-permanent member of the United Nations Security Council. It is now very clear that the Russian Federation is a very strong partner of the Republic of Sierra Leone. We'll continue to work together, and incidentally, we're going to take the presidency of the United Nations Security Council immediately after the Russian Federation in August this year.
And that's it on the program today. Thank you so much for watching. I'm Layo Olarinde.